to the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Leadership Development Podcast, where we explore the innovations and leadership strategies shaping the future of the fire service. This podcast is for Metro Chiefs by Metro Chiefs, engaging in conversations about issues that are relevant to members of our association. This series, however, can be incredibly valuable for current or aspiring fire chiefs in departments of any size, in the U.S. or internationally. Today's episode is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. We're talking about data, decision-making, and the future direction of the fire service at the national level. And there are few people better suited to that conversation than our guest today. Joining us today is Dr. Lori Moore-Merrell, who most recently served as the U.S. Fire Administrator. Dr. Moore-Merrell, or Dr. Lori, if it's okay if I call you that, is widely recognized as one of the leading voices in the fire service when it comes to data, analytics, and evidence-based decision-making. Prior to her appointment as the U.S. Fire Administrator, she served as the President and CEO of the International Public Safety Data Institute, where she helped transform how fire departments across the country understand and use data to improve outcomes. Dr. Lori's work has shaped national conversations around response times, deployment models, community risk reduction, and firefighter safety. She's also been instrumental in advancing the integration of data science into everyday fire service leadership, helping move our profession from anecdote-driven, or what my gut says, right, into evidence-informed, or as John Oates says, data-inspired decision-making. Dr. Moore-Merrell, welcome to the podcast. Did I leave anything out in your introduction?
You're very
can't imagine
kind.
I
That was very generous. Hi, Alec. I'm really glad to be with you, and thank you for the invitation. What a great opportunity. And I have been hearing lovely things about how wonderful you're doing with these podcasts. This is a lot of work. So I'm impressed already with the preparation that you've done even for today. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that feedback and for being here. It's been a real privilege in a lot of ways, just because I get to talk to some pretty brilliant people in a business that I really love. And so it's the opportunity to connect with folks like you is just a real privilege, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. So before we kind of dive deeply into the technical side, I'd like to start with you. And what is it that continues to motivate you to push the fire service forward, especially when we talk about the space of, the really sexy space of data and innovation?
I love that you said that. I've often said that data is a sexy thing. So we've tried to do that for many years, and maybe if we say it enough, people will realize it, right? So what motivates me to keep going? Well, I think that it's because we still have so much to do. I know that I'm sort of an accomplishment-driven person, but we have to, as I remember, the journey is important, but I am very accomplishment-driven. And I think that there are still a lot of things we need to do in the data space. We are obviously accomplishing things with NERIS and changing up the new national fire data system to an analytics platform. There's still a lot that I am hopeful that it's not just about data, it's not just about output of information, but we're actually going to start talking about outcomes and really start to understand and move the needle around, a mindset shift about what is important and what's not in intelligence, information. And I see there's still so much ground to cover there. And even when we have chiefs in the metro, and they're probably, some of the more savvy in our industry, are those who are leading these big departments, and I see them and they begin to get it. And it makes me very excited that even you today want to have a conversation about data, because you get the importance, you get the value, right, of the data. But that doesn't span to everybody. And some of our most vulnerable communities, some of our most vulnerable departments don't get it still. And I want them to have the same information and the same insight as you have at a metro level, and the understanding, because perhaps in some scale, they need it even more, right? And so that's what motivates me to keep talking about information and data and the value of it.
When we talk about that, specifically in the context of metro departments, because you're talking about departments that are 100 to 200 years old, right? I mean, there's some old departments that are part of the Metro, and we've managed to function without Excel spreadsheets and data analytics, even artificial intelligence, right, for years. And we've grown departments and we've served our communities hopefully as effectively as we can, in a lot of ways based on intuition. So why is data so critical for fire chiefs today? And I'm sure it may have been critical back then. We just maybe didn't know it yet. But why is it so critical, not just operationally, but strategically?
I think that I'll answer your question about why is it so important today first, because I think that we don't move today without information, right? We all carry it on our phones. We carry it. You look at an app that advises you. You look at a map, tells you where to drive. You look at and somebody giving you direction, right? So we literally don't do anything. If you're wearing a biomonitoring device right now, you check your sleep when you wake up. How many steps did I get in today? What was our calorie intake? We live on data today, and it has become the driver of literally everything we do, every aspect of life for many, many people. So I think that the importance of it for Metro chiefs today, once they realize the insights you can gain from it, then it is very difficult now to rely back on those gut intuitions that you mentioned. And we look for that intelligence. We look for it. And when it's not there, you feel vulnerable. You feel like you're not fully informed. How do we do it before this? It was around experience. It was around what you were taught by your mentor. It was around the knowledge that was left for you or given to you by those who went before you. And so we learned how to do things out of experience, out of hard won lessons sometimes by doing it wrong. And we don't have a tolerance today for doing things wrong and learning
Right.
the same way, right? Because if I can get the intelligence to do it right the first time, then we have a lot less tolerance for getting things wrong. And the forgiveness is not there as much, honestly. So I think there's been some transition. I'm not sure all that's good, by the way. I'm not sure that we don't need, and I'll go back to what you said about what John Oates says is a data insight or data informed decision making. And I believe in that. I think that data informed plus experience. And that's how I talk about using AI today, too. It is AI informed. You can really cut down on time, by the way, for research and all kinds of things using AI, but you can't just use it blindly. You need to leverage your experience and the lessons learned with that. Now we've got something of value. So I think that's kind of where we are today from a chief perspective and decision-making perspective.
So it's got to be integrated with that level of experience that comes from the Metro institutions, right? From your responses over all those years, you have to integrate that experience and incorporate the data. In the more recent window, right, since you've started in this industry and you've watched, really had a front seat to the changes over the last 15 to 20 years. And so in that shorter window, I don't know if it's just like technology has been this, exponential curve of the increase in the collection and analysis of data, but where are we now versus 2 decades ago?
Oh my, things have changed tremendously since, 5 years ago, not just 2 decades, right? So where we have been on the data pathway is I can recall, and I literally just had this question this week. What was the why around NERIS, right? If we want to just bring NERIS to the forefront and talk about that for a moment. So I was asked, what was the why? And I began to tell the story that in 2005, so that takes us back the 2 decades you mentioned. So in 2005, we were looking for insights around how to deploy fire departments from a crew size perspective. What was the right crew size? And this goes back to even a decade prior to that, when we had Alan Brunacini talking about crew size, and we began to look at the NFPA 1710 standard and what does right look like? What's the optimal crew size for an engine, for a truck? What does an effective response force? We didn't call it that back then, but what does that look like for a low hazard dwelling or a high rise response? What are the science behind these things? And we were trying to formulate what does that look like, and all of that was gut intuition back then. It was experience. It was, I know this is right because I've lived it, and that's what came to the table. Well, in 2005 we began to talk about how do we do the science behind crew size? How do we look at testing what is actually correct? And in that space we went to the INFRS data and began to look at what was there and say, can we pull enough data out of the national data system for departments to be able to assess this, even if we coupled it with their computer-aided dispatch data back then? And can we get enough to be able to tell the story of what right looks like from a company crew size perspective? And the answer to that was no, we don't have the data to do that. And we don't have the information because that legacy data system was never designed to talk about operations. It was designed to tell you about the fire itself. Right. What was the cause and origin? What was burning? How far did the fire spread? It never included any information about operations. And so as we looked at this from a science perspective to look at crew size and operational deployment, there was nothing from a data perspective. So all we had in the first version of 1710 was truly experientially written. It was not based on data at all. And so when it came out in 2001 with the very first edition, there was zero that was not experiential information that went into that standard. And so we began to say, can we do better? And the only way to do that when you don't have data is to go to experimentation. And so we went to field experiments, and you might remember now the NIST studies. Everybody called them the low hazard, right? NIST study, what does a single family dwelling fire look like? What does the high rise environment and how does that change? And the Metro chiefs were intimately involved in this. Russ Sanders was one of my advisors, Denny Compton, Shorty Bryson, all three of them. I started calling them the trifecta because they were our advisors on these studies, because no data, you must go to field experimentation. And so that's what we did. And so as that began to grow, and we got one of the first AFG grants to do these field experiments to try to capture crew size information around that and data for the first time. And so 2005, we got an award, and these awards kept coming to allow us to do this field experimentation and to start to build out what crew size data looks like. What does operational data look like? What does response time look like? And start to talk again about response time. And you probably remember this, Chief, is when you would say response time and the department next door says response time, you could be saying two totally different things.
Yeah,
you're measuring two different things.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Right. And it really gets into those definitions. So this is when we started talking about all that, is because of these field experiments. And so they went forward. And then about 2009, 2010, in conjunction, in fact, it was released at a Metro conference where the NIST studies were released, announced, and those went forward with trying to pull in what operational data looks like. So that then led to what is the data schema that needs, what the data list, right? And the definitions of those data variables. When I say data schema, that's what I mean. What does that look like for a data system that can now advise chiefs around operations, and whether you are literally deploying resources to match the risk environment in which you're operating? And your environment's not like the people next door or across the country. Specific for your environment, what does right look like from a deployment of resources versus your risk environment? And that's what we wanted to build with NERIS, is how do I know my risk environment? How do I know my deployment? And how well does that match? And you've probably heard me say it over and over that the outcome of that, if we don't do it right, is firefighter injury and death, civilian injury and death, and property loss. Those are our three outcomes. And we have to continue to look at how do we do that right so that we are far less vulnerable to negative outcomes in those three categories. So that's kind of where we came from and the why around NERIS, and where I think we have to continue to go forward with that kind of mindset today.
Let me dig into that a little bit, because what you accomplished with the NERIS transition, and I'll be completely authentic and vulnerable with you. I thought it was an impossible undertaking. I was like, Dr.
You're not
Lori
the
Strange,
only one.
there's no way that you can change the federal government, right? This just beast that you have to turn. I mean, you hear about turning the Titanic, right? And you're flipping the wheel this way, and people are reversing the engine the other way, right? I mean, it's just the federal system it can be cumbersome, and so what a huge undertaking. And so I'm sure that you anticipated and continue to anticipate that this will be an iterative process. So after seeing this roll out, I'm curious, do you see gaps that still exist in the data? Like where I used to talk about walking somewhere after an interview and I'm like, oh, I should have said this. Oh, I should. So your little moments where you're like, dang it, I should have done X, Y, Z. Do you see gaps that are in that system? Pieces of the data sets that you wish that we were collecting that you see maybe coming in the next iterations?
I guess I don't want to call them gaps right now. The answer is yes. But I feel like we planned this in such a way that it was going to be iterative. And we tried to teach that. In the fire service, we want instant gratification, don't we? In everything we do. I want it all, and I want it all right now. And we tried, the team and myself, we tried to say, listen, we're going to do version 1. We are going to do the basics, and we need to get everybody onboarded with the basics of version 1. And a lot of people haven't heard that. And so they do want it all right now. This is version 1. The team is now working on version 2. And so it's going to look a bit different. It's going to have some other variables. It's going to have your risk assessment capability in there and your CRR planning. And so there are iterations that will add and continue to be dynamic. The other thing that has happened is that we're learning from the fire service. And when you don't know what you don't know, that's a complex situation.
Right.
Complicated. We knew this was going to be complicated. We knew that it was going to be difficult, but complex is when you don't know what you don't know. And so we learn along the way. And that's part of the dynamic nature of what is the NERIS system, and the why we continue to listen to the fire service, and why the engagement with the technical panels, and why the engagement with fire service advisors that keep coming on the team because they find something. It's like, can we do this? Or do you think you can have this? Yeah, why don't you come on the technical panel and help advise that, right? And so, yeah, if you find something in NERIS, you're probably going to be added to the team. So these are the sorts of things that are happening. So I think, we could call it gaps. I don't like to call it that. I like to call it we're still growing and still learning and still evolving to the space of the fire service. And I hope that never stops. That was the intent of NERIS, is that it could be agile and dynamic. And I would often say, if we have flying saucers that are on fire in, 2 years, that we can add that as a variable set for what's burning and how they burn. And all of that just evolves, and it just happens organically. And from what I'm seeing with the tech, and I saw this morning, the new flying taxis, we may not be far off, right, from having new fire risk around our space.
Well, I just, for what it's worth, I think the fire service is incredibly proud of you that you were able to pull that across the finish line. Thank you for making me eat my words. I saw it as an impossible task. And so now you are a person in my mind as someone who can do the impossible.
That's very kind, very generous. Thank you.
So is the fire service struggling more with the quality of data, the standardization of data, or the application of it? Or yes to all?
I think yes to all of that, Alec. And I think that it matters as to where, because I think we started the conversation with there are some chiefs that are much more data savvy than others. Yourself being one of those, right? You're eye-opening to the possibilities, and you're looking rather than waiting for somebody to hand it to you and teach you how to use it, right? And we have the scope and scale. Not that that's bad; it's just different. And so there's the scope and scale of data integration and adaptation, as you say, and I think yes to all of what you just said. And I think we have to do it with our own, each of us, our individual comfort level of where are you comfortable in leading your department to, adapt to the new possibilities, adopt the new possibilities, right? And then move on with actual implementation and use of them. Knowing something and then acting on it are two different things. And I think all of you as chiefs will say that that's absolutely true. Having knowledge and then turning it into action takes leadership. And so I think that's where we are from a data perspective. You're going to have the data delivered to you. Nearest is going to give you insights you've never had. We're going to have new insights as a nation we've never had. And so understanding where you used to struggle, where am I going to put a new station, or where does the hazmat teams best respond from? Where do we need to have new community planning, or where do I have a new interface community, and how do I adapt what deploys from that station closest to that? What are my new evacuation routes? All of this is possible. All of this, and having this right in front of you that as knowledge is absolutely possible right now. What you choose to do with it is a leadership perspective and maybe a bandwidth perspective, and how you have you and your team positioned to actually use the intelligence that is coming from the data applications.
I really want to dig down into that, right? You're talking about the leadership, having it versus using it, right? And then change management is a huge undertaking. You've led the USFA through some incredible changes, right? Almost, in my view, impossible changes. So I want to drill into that a little bit more and understand the leadership application, for lack of a better word, that the leadership tips and tricks that are going to make us more effective in using that data and implementing change as a result of it. If you don't mind, kind of talking through that a little bit. I mean, because you went through some pretty significant transformational change, and you led through that transformational change. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. We did do a lot of organizational change or administration change during my tenure. And to tell that story, you first have to know where to look. And so for chiefs who are looking into this, I'll just give you a bit of my story. The methods or the methodological thinking that I had as I approached it. When I went into an organization, and knowing as new chiefs come in, the first thing you want to do is figure out your footing, right? What do I have to
Right.
work with? What's here? Where are the landmines, which is even more important,
Yes.
right? So these are the kinds of things, and that's a lesson that Denny Compton taught me years ago. Anytime you go into an organization, you get the lay of the land, you learn the people that are closest to you, and you find the landmines. And more importantly, you find, the person who you can trust to show you where the landmines are. And so all of these lessons came to play when I went into the USFA. And so understanding when I went in that, first of all, I was confronted with a situation that was like, I had no idea it was this bad. I knew from the outside, and I've been in the fire service for a very long time, and familiar with USFA, been to not only to the campus, but worked with the organization for many, many years. I didn't know what I didn't know. And when I went in and began to learn these things, my first thing was, what on earth have I gotten myself into here? I was happy on the outside. I had perfectly good position. I was doing fun things. What have I done? And I'm sure there are some chiefs who have had that same kind of, epiphany as, what have I done? What, with this decision? But now it's time to refocus and sort it out, roll up your sleeves and lead. And so I said to my XO at the time, I said, can you please get me the legislation that established the USFA? I need to understand what we're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And so I methodically went through the 1974 Fire Prevention and Control Act, and that created the USFA in 74, and tried to sort out exactly what we're supposed to be doing so that I knew where are the gaps that we need to fix, and then what are the things we're doing that's sort of gotten off the rails that we need to pull it back in, because first of all, shouldn't be doing it and it's not effective. So it was that sort of an assessment that I went through. So back to grassroots and start from there, from scratch, as mission driven, go forward, right? What are we supposed to be doing? And so that helped me to align my mindset. I will compare that to everything that was happening, and then said, all right, we're going to get realigned with our mission. And so then you start to teach mission driven movement to the troops, right? We are going to stay mission focused, and here's the mission. We're going to realign. I want everybody to memorize what's our mission. We had our mission statement. I tweaked it slightly, not a lot, because the mission had actually been written, believe it or not, based on the legislation. And so I had every staff member, we went through and they memorized the mission and we understood the mission. And then we went through our vision documents and understood they needed to be tweaked a bit. Strategic plan did not align with the legislation or the mission. We had to tweak that. And so one by one, very methodically go through and realign the organization to mission driven, focused, and move forward. Well, as part of that, things begin to turn. Something happens when you get mission focused and you can pull everybody into that. People focus is one. You cut out a lot of the noise that people been just going in circles, maybe not accomplishing anything because it was just noise, things they thought they should be doing. The other thing that happens is you see some kind of, it's almost magical cohesion of the group. They start to come together because they've got now a central focus. And you see people aligning that didn't even talk to each other before. And now we have a mission that we need to work together. A collaboration happens. And it's really very cool to watch things come together when you can align things and lead in that. So that's what I watched happen to that organization. We did some other reorganizing around, where the divisions, where the departments, who answers to whom, who's leading, who's the managers. We did a lot of that because it frankly needed to be done to align again with the mission. And that gave us then the bandwidth, honestly, to start things like our USFA summit. That is in the legislation and supposed to have been done since 1974 and had never been done. And so we stood up in 2022, the first USFA summit on fire prevention and control. And then in 23 and in 24. So understanding and then pulling in the National Fire Service and partnering externally and leading together and saying, these are our issues, identifying what are the issues for the fire service, from climate change, wildfire, to technology-driven risk, to health and safety, and on, right? The built environment, or codes and standards. This is our mission lanes. And how do we then lead as the nation? And that's what the evolution of the One Voice movement came, is how do we lead forward in the nation in our lanes to actually move something? And that then enabled, the establishment of NERIS and as one of our lanes, and we could all focus appropriately on how do we now stand up a new analytics platform, not just a database that is a black hole that everybody hates and gets nothing of value, to this new analytics platform that is near real time, giving you real insights and data-informed decision-making capability. So I think, Alec, it's those sorts of insights around what's your why, what is your baseline if you got enabling legislation or an ordinance or a charter or anything that has been established in your policies and regulations around the fire service? Realign to that. Remember your why and your baseline operation of what you're supposed to be doing. And it may mean you let go of some of the noise and the things that people have fun doing, but they're not really effective. And you realign to the mission, and you'll watch the cohesion, you'll watch things move forward and actually begin to elevate the entire organization, where there's pride in the organization and they're proud to be part of it. And they're wearing logo wear that maybe they, not worn before. And you just watch things happen in people that now we're aligned and we're focused forward. And I watched it happen with the entirety of the fire service, where we were moving in lockstep, and we did these fire prevention, fire stop tours is what we called them, along the way. And we go to cities like Philly and New York and Chicago and sit with the Metro chiefs and talk about, what do you need? Where can we support you? How can we get messaging out around the fire threat in your city, in your county, and us stand behind you as the national leaders to say, you need this focus, you need this help, you need these resources, and stand by chiefs in order to do that. So it enables a lot of capability once you align with your why.
I love that. And you tackled such a complex organization with really complex problems with multiple stakeholders, but you did it in a really sort of simplistic way, right? We have to get back to the basics. We need to understand what our foundation is, our North Star, whichever analogy you want to use, because you can't elevate something, right? If you go to the building construction industry, you can't elevate it without a strong foundation. If you don't know what that foundation is, or what your compass point is, what our destination is, I think it's really hard to have a team coalesce around anything, right? You can't grab a hold of the rope and help me pull it unless you know where the rope is.
Precisely.
And so I love that. So thank you for sharing that, because I think all of us are doing that. You mentioned it, you're coming into an organization, and Denny and I had the same conversation or a similar conversation in our podcast about you need to know the organization, need to know allies and maybe adversaries. You need to know where the landmines are. It's hard to walk towards a destination if you blow your leg off really early on. So definitely helpful to find those. When you were there as the U.S. Fire Administrator, what was your vision then beyond? Like, if you served another 20 years in that position, which I don't know that anybody could do that, right? But if you did, what was your vision for where the fire service was going, staying true to that foundation of the USFA?
Wow, that is a very strategic question, and I'm going to give you a strategic answer.
Got it.
So, I would have liked to have had 4 more years, obviously. We had hoped that we would have 4 more years, because I did have a list. We had a list of things we wanted to accomplish. One is to move the Fire Act grants back over to the USFA for management. That was going to be one of the next things, so that I could focus better on getting those grants. First of all, the NOFOs out, getting the applications in, focus on that, and linking the nearest data set to the FEMA Go grant application, right? Because doing that would have alleviated a lot about that application. You would have had maybe a 1-page application now for a grant, because we already have all your data. You don't have to tell us about your risk, because I already have it. You don't have to tell me about how many engines and how many trucks you have and where you've responded, or your data, any of that, because I already have your data. So your application would have been reduced, like I said, to probably 1 page to apply. Just tell me what you need. We'll assess whether or not it fits with your risk environment and whether or not you actually need it. All of that can be done. And so that was one of the things that we were on short term to move, if we had another term. So that's one thing I had on the list that I think would have had major implication for departments of all sizes. I often have said, and I've had this conversation with a lot of the FEMA grant folks along the way, is that some metros do really well in getting grants approved, and a lot of metros get what they need. But a lot of if you get the wrong reviewer, you get, sort of downgraded or downscored because of your budget size. Well, that's very short-sighted. If you get the wrong reviewer, you're in trouble, right? And so people who don't understand that about a metro budget, it's not about your budget. It's about that in scope and scale to your risk. And understand you got to have that budget, and it's still not enough because your risks are so high. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so if you get a reviewer who's not particularly well adept at that understanding, then metros can suffer in this space. I wanted to eliminate that kind of conversation. I wanted to make sure that like I said, we already had your risk data. I know what your risks are because it's going to be in NERIS. I know what you deploy because that's going to be in NERIS. So can we do better at having real intelligence? You said insightful intelligence, right, for decision making. It applies here. In spades, it applies here because that can be done differently. So you can see I'm very passionate about that. I thought that needed to be done. But that's one of the things that I had envisioned to change had we stayed. Obviously, there was going to be more around our global reach. I think that the U.S. can really lead from a global perspective. I would have liked to have done more with the World Fire Congress. I'm still going to be doing that from the outside and moving some things with the World Fire Congress, particularly in the communities of practice and nation sharing knowledge. I think that is an absolute home run. And that's one of the things that I really hate most about seeing the U.S. really start to curtail a lot of our international relationships. I think that's a huge mistake, and particularly for the fire service. But those are a couple of things that I would have liked to have continued and expanded.
Well, I want to shift from your vision there, right? So it's still a current vision, but it sort of in your past position. I'm going to ask you to put on a little bit of a futurist hat here, if you can. And based on your perspective throughout your entire career, what are the biggest challenges for fire and emergency services right now? And I'll ask two questions in kind of one, right? So I don't, ask you to answer them short. But what are the biggest challenges? And then are they technical challenges? Are they adaptive challenges? Just to steal some from our EFO stuff, but are they technical or adaptive or cultural? And what's limiting us, right? I hope that makes sense, what I'm asking you. But really, wow. What's coming? What's coming? What is that, a light at the end of the tunnel, or is it a train? If it's a train, what is it?
Wow. We could spend the rest of today and likely the week talking about these kinds of, that's a big question. Let's talk first of all, and I know it's probably front of mind. If you ask that to most fire chiefs, they're going to say, especially Metro chiefs, your biggest challenge is always budget, right? You know what you want to do, what you need to do, but budget is always a challenge. And how do you defend that? How do you get what you need? How do you compete for budget dollars that are often not nearly enough? And you're always competing, defending usually what you have, and getting more has become a bit elusive. You're more defending to keep what you have, and right. That shouldn't be that way. So I think that's a technical challenge, is that we have to continue, and that's where our data informed decision making and presentation of that data in a way that policymakers can understand, decision makers can understand. That continues to be a challenge. That will be ongoing. And that is where fire chiefs have got to continue to learn not just about the data and their budgeting and how to continue to improve those things, but how do they communicate about it? Because we have, frankly, AI now that can do some incredible budget work and justification. How are you going to communicate it? And what is your leadership capability for gaining support, right, from decision makers? Are you passionate enough to lead forward? They're going to support you because you want to do that. And I think that's key. for leaders and really focusing on your own leadership capability. I think around the cultural insights, if we want to just talk about those challenges for just a little bit, I think we still have cultural issues with leading people who are not like you. And what I mean by that, it might not be the chief per se, because most of our, particularly Metro chiefs, are pretty savvy and they're pretty open-minded and understand how to lead women, for example, understand how to leading people of different ethnicity, different gender, and different life styles, life choices. Um, but not all of them, right? We still have folks who struggle because we all lead based on what we believe and our value system personally. And when you do that and don't do it with an opportunity or an open mind to continue to learn what you may not know, then we're often set in positions of judgment, maybe starting to get some understanding, but we never reach acceptance as leaders of people who are not like us. And unless you can get there, it's hard to lead people not like you. And so I think culturally, we still got a ways to go there to get us up from I often talk about that as a ladder. If I can get past the first rung on the ladder is judgment. We all do it. We all judge people who are not like us. The key is that our emotional intelligence has grown to a point that we can move to seeking some sort of understanding. I may not agree with you still, but I seek to understand. And that's the next rung on the ladder. And then can I move to, some sort of acceptance? If we can climb the ladder as leaders like that, and we can continue to grow our own emotional intelligence, then we can lead cultural change. You see, cultural change comes from really decision making at scale, right? What you tolerate as a leader becomes culture. If you don't change behavior, I should have said decisions about behavior at scale. Behavior at scale becomes culture. And as leaders, if we tolerate behaviors that are unacceptable or inappropriate, it becomes the culture. And so I think we still have major challenges in our leadership around that. And we can do better. And I think it's often a chief's emotional intelligence that needs to be grown, how you react to other people. We have to groom that. We have to grow that. And then you can move up the ladder to acceptance and growing other people and stopping behaviors that are inappropriate or dangerous so that you change the culture. So I know that was a bit more in depth, but I think it's important that we understand as leaders how change actually takes place in culture. We can't just keep saying the word and thinking that you have nothing to do with it. You have everything to do with it. Your station captains, your battalion chiefs, everybody has something to do with not allowing behaviors to become culture. And that's important. I think that's still one of our biggest challenges as leaders in the fire service. And that leads to adaptive change. It takes time to right the ship if you've got toxic culture for anybody in the fire service. It takes time to right that ship. And I think that is an adaptive change as well that has to take place along the way. So those are some of the things that are front of mind for me, Chief, whenever I'm asked that kind of question.
It's an evolution, not a revolution, right? It has to, the organization
Always
has to evolve. And I mean, you led an organization that was distributed across the country, right? I feel out of control sometimes just leading an organization that's distributed across the city when you're trying to shift culture and cultural norms. And I've done quite a bit of leadership work here, trying to shift the leadership philosophy. And it has been definitely an evolution, not a revolution, right? And we have some casualties along the way, as you know, just part of transformational change. Let's talk really quick. I've only got a couple more questions for you, so I could keep you all day. I'm not going to do that to you, I promise. But let's talk about the opportunities for innovation in our space. I think you keep your futurist hat on. Um, you know, we talk. I mean, as I mentioned early on in the conversation, we've got fire departments in the metro that are 100, 200 years old. They've been doing this business for a long time, and there's a risk of getting trapped into the way we've always done it, right? And failing to employ creativity or imagination or innovation, or, as you know, data inspired changes. What do you see in your crystal ball about the fire service shifting over the next couple decades?
Wow, I love that question because that's kind of where I'm living right now, is in this space. And that is we've been talking about data, but it's using that data from a risk perspective, from our deployment capability perspective, and understanding the gap. Now, I am going to use the word gap because I do believe that risk have changed so much that we have a massive gap in our capability to respond versus our risk environment. And it's on many fronts. And I think that given that gap, we're not going to get enough people. We're never going to have enough people. On major events, there's never enough resources of any kind. And so understanding how do we shore up those gaps today that is different than we would have done 5, even 10 years ago. And I think that's with technology. I think we have a real opportunity to deploy some incredible technology in our space that shores up those gaps and makes our people healthier, keeps them safer, makes them better. And
Right.
I think that we have to be really open-minded about technology and not to just say at the first set, because I know chiefs are always, ready to go. I don't have the budget for that. I can't afford that. We need to not have that be our first thought. We need to figure out, why do we need it? What can it fulfill? What's the real purpose? And is there value? If there's value, then we begin to say, okay, where are the trade-offs that I can figure out a way to get that? Where are the other, places I can go for funding that I can get that? Because I believe that technology will make a difference. I think there are going to be, and I'll give you an example. Let's just talk about the wildfire space for a moment. In the wildfire space since 2023, so just in about 2.5 years, there have been over 700 technology companies launched. Innovation, technology in that short time period. I mean, it's staggering. And so I worked with some colleagues who have started cataloging, and out of the catalog of that number, we sorted them into 10 categories of technology. And it's everything from your modeling of risk to modeling of fire perimeter to satellite to anything aerial, UAS, both from sensor and data gathering to suppression to fuels mitigation work, technology. And all of these different categories, it's incredible the capabilities we have. And it's not tech that replaces our people. It's tech that makes them better, tech that makes them safer. And I equate it often to, we really haven't had a lot of tech innovation since we all adopted the thermal imaging camera. I mean, let's just think that through for a minute, right?
It's been a minute.
It's time. It's been a minute. It's time for us to look at tech and how can tech make a difference in our space. And I'm really hopeful that as we're letting go of the legacy data system and embracing Nearest and everybody going, yeah, we got some growing to do. Yes, Nearest is still evolving. Yes, there are going to be some continued pain points, not with Nearest, but often with the RMS vendors, by the way. That's a side note. But it is, we've got some growing to do. But as we embrace that and this evolution, to use your word, I think we need to do an evolution around technology and how to bring it into our space as well. There's so much that is really incredible. There's some that's never going to make it, but there are so many that are really spot on. They're well developed. We are working right now around getting a technology test path. Because there's no test path. They're demoing this tech And a lot of it's being purchased based on a demo. We from a UL standpoint, we
Yes.
from an IBH standpoint, from a NIST standpoint, from a DoD standpoint, these are all the players that are in this collaborative that are talking about testing technology to make sure that it performs, that it's efficient and effective, and that it's safe. And we began to say, is there a path to validation and certification of some of this technology? And so all of this is in play. And I want the chiefs to know that's happening to make sure that the tech that you purchase is ready to be purchased and deployed. But I think it's a brand new day. And I want us to all be open-minded for where does technology fill the gaps that we have in our capability to now address our new and very changed, very dynamic risk environment.
Well, and that verification and validation is so helpful, right? You talked about money, right? I can't afford to do it. Well, at some point, you're not going to be able to afford not to do it. And
Precisely.
A lot of us don't have the capacity, don't understand the technology enough to vet out the products that are coming out. And so to know that somebody's out there doing that work who is doing the research to verify and validate that this product does work and will be beneficial to an organization is going to be huge. So thank you for engaging in that work. Last hat I want you to wear today is your coach hat. All right. So do you have a whistle or anything you can?
A whistle.
That's
right. Yeah, and it's stopwatch, right?
Yes, a whistle and a stopwatch. I'm going to talk about new or future fire chiefs, right? And if you're advising that next generation, what competencies do they need to develop now to be successful in this evolving environment? And if they don't know where to start, where can they start? What one or two steps would you recommend for them to try and get where they need to be? And I'll probably do this too. Where we get where we need to be effective in the next phase of the fire service.
Oh, I love that. Well, let's just start with, all of us struggle when we face difficulty, right? And it often, in a lot of generations, you are either, rolling around in the what if I'd made that decision differently? What if, or why is this happening to me? Why am I confronted with this kind of difficulty, or with a mayor who's like that, or a city manager who's like this, or why, am I having these, even with the crews, the troops, having such difficulty getting them on board, or, with what you want to do, or, whether it's even the local, right? Sometimes we have challenges with our local unions. And so when these kinds of challenges happen and you are going, why is this happening to me? What is going on here? What we need to do as leaders is, first of all, step back and go, all right, I see this as a challenge today, but if I step back and look at this, what are the opportunities? And it's not always easy to see them up front.
Right.
But challenges always deliver opportunities. And so if we ask the question, instead of why is this happening to me, what does this make possible? Just practice it. Just try it.
I love it.
Right? What does this make possible? And then it changes our insights. It changes how we perceive situations. And it changes us, frankly. And that's another one of those emotional intelligence things is getting out of the negative of the pity party, right? And why is this happening to me? To, all right, what does this make possible? And how do I lead in that direction? The other thing is perceiving them. And I heard this a lot. I read a lot of military type leadership books in the past, and just thinking about, we often feel that things that are not going well, we see them as a threat. And again, perceiving them as an opportunity or an advantage, right? Okay, it is, let me think this through, and what is possible here around this opportunity, and what can it become? And then the last thing that I would say, that from a leadership perspective, and this is something that Denny Compton has always, he's been my mentor for a long time. You probably knew that. But Denny will often pay me compliments to, encourage. And one of the things that he says to me, and I've taken it to heart and I share it with other people because I think that it's important for leaders to always be hungry. That's what he says. You have to remain hungry. You've got to wake up in the morning going, what do I need to do to have an impact? What is my impact today? So a hunger for leadership is really important. Hustle, make sure you're getting it every time. And just hard work. And that's one of the things that, I often say, and Denny and Russ Sanders, who's my other mentor, would say that I work smarter, not harder, but I'm not sure that's true because I try to work in such a way that nobody's going to outwork me. And so that's something that I would say, always be ready to hustle. Don't be outworked. Make that part of who you are, that you're willing to put in the time every time. Lead with your heart, inspiration, passion, compassion, being kind. That is one of the things that I hope people will always say about me is that I'm kind, as a leader, and that I take the time to, be compassionate toward people. And then the last one is humility. I think that humility is really, really important. It's about giving people grace. It is about learning to give yourself grace. But you'll probably notice that those words all started with H, right? So hunger, hustle, heart, and humility, I think are really, really important characteristics for leaders. And those are the kinds that's what drives me.
I love that. You make me think of a couple of different authors. One is Jocko Willink. I recently saw a reel with him in it, and you said you read military leadership, books. I don't know if you're a fan, but he was talking about when something bad happens, he's like, good. I remember seeing that. He's like, good. What do you mean good, right? Well, good, because it's an opportunity for us to take this path or this path or this path. And it always kind of leads to growth, which I thought was really, that's kind of where my head went when you were talking about that. But the other place was you were talking about the H's. And Patrick Lencioni, I don't know if you've ever read his Ideal Team Player, but he talks about the people you want to work with, right? He talks about humble, hungry, and smart. So, humility, right? There's no ego there. They're very focused on the team. They're coachable, right? So if you tell me that there's a flaw, like, you don't have to worry about me blowing up, right? I'm going to internalize that. I'm going to be introspective, and I'm going to try and improve that gap. But the hungry thing, right? You want a team that's going to participate. Like, I don't need you sitting there passively while we're all working our tails off here. I need you to grab a hold of the rope and pull it in the same direction that I am. So back to that hunger, that nobody's going to outwork me mentality. And then smart, right? Intellectually, but also emotionally intelligent. So you have the ability to connect with people. But that was where my head went when you were talking about that. So apparently you would be an ideal team player. I'm just throwing it out there.
So I would try.
So to whoever gets to work with you, congratulations to them, because I think they've got a great human to work with here. Dr. Lori, if you could leave us with one mindset shift or one call to action when it comes to leadership or the future of the profession, what is it? What would it be?
Oh, wow. I used to quote, and I'm trying to even remember now, it's been so many years, but it just popped in my head when you just asked that question, is that those who are going to be the happiest in life are those who have learned to serve. And I think that's true, and I don't know why that just popped in my head, but it did. And I think that's important, is that we all keep in perspective, particularly as chiefs, that we're here to serve. And you serve at the highest level, and you have a lot on your shoulders, but it is, at the end of the day, service.
Yeah, you remember my son asking me about the fire service, and he works in the fire service now. And I remember telling him, I said, I can look back and in my heart know that it's a life well lived. I've spent my entire adult life in service of other people, whether that's on the front lines, right, going into their time of need, or even in the current position where you're charged with caring for people and caring for a community. I think it is an incredibly rewarding career. And gratitude's another word that I love, but I'm incredibly grateful to have had that opportunity. And I'm incredibly grateful to have spent this time with you. So we'll close it out here. Dr. Moore-Merrell, thank you for taking the time to join us today. And more importantly, thanks for the impact that you've had on the fire service across the country and beyond. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Leadership Development Podcast. This podcast is created by Metro Chiefs for Metro Chiefs, serving as a space to learn, grow, and tackle some of the challenges facing our profession, but do it together. If you have ideas for future topics or guests, we'd love to hear from you. So shoot us an email, text message, or a phone call. And until next time, stay safe, stay engaged, and keep leading forward.